What's good, guys? Today we have another remake of one of Tyler's new songs on Call Me If You Get Lost, and I think this track is probably one of my favorites in terms of production just because of how weird the sounds and the instruments are, and I really like the melodies. I think they're dope. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into the remake of MASSA by Tyler the Creator on Logic Pro X. So first things first, we have the intro. At first I thought it was a sample because it was so well done. And yeah, I just kind of wish Tyler made another song with just this looping again and again. Anyways, the main element of this intro is definitely the flute. I actually combined 3 different instruments to make the main melody. First one is flute solo, which is a Logic stock instrument. I basically added some vibrato to it to make it slightly more natural. I chose the V1 setting, and then I also added some EQ by EQing out the lows and the highs. This is what it sounds like on its own. And then I added another piccolo just to give it a little bit more brightness. It's very soft, so you can barely hear it. And then I also added a studio trombone too, just because there's a little bit of a brass sound if you can really listen carefully. Also very soft, but altogether we have this main melody. And then there's also another, I would say, secondary melody, and this is another flute sound. So I chose the exact same flute solo, didn't even EQ anything, so we have this. After the first 4 bars, we have this really cool new flute melody that comes in. And so for this one, I actually used Logic's native American flute rather than their normal flute because it sounds a bit more close to Tyler's version. However, for the first bar, there's this really weird sequence where it's like this. And as you can see, it sounds very unnatural, so I slapped on another normal flute solo on it just for this bit, and together they sound like this. And then throughout the intro, we also have this bass playing. And for this one, I chose the upright ballad bass. I did add some EQ by EQing out some of the highs, and then added a chorus effect to it. And the final component of the intro is the guitar. For this one, I chose the steel string acoustic guitar from Logic, and this is what it sounds like. In the 5th bar, the pattern changes a little bit, so I'll just show you guys along with everything else playing together. And then we move on to the chorus. This is the beat switch, and honestly I wish the intro went on for longer. We can start with the drums first. The beat switch comes in with a very abrupt change consisting of 3 snares. And the first one, if you listen to it closely, is a double snare. It's like this. And then for the 2nd and 3rd snare of the triplet, very iconic Tyler snare that I found. I did tweak the EQ a little bit by bringing out the frequencies around this range, and then I also used an enveloper just to bring out the attack a little bit more and bring down the release, so it's a little bit more punchy. And by itself, it sounds like this. There's also a kick. I actually used 2 kicks to create, I guess, a more layered kick. The first kick sounds like this. Now I did EQ out some of the highs and brought out a bit of the lower frequencies just because there's a very muffled kick with almost like a very large boom. And then for the second kick, very similar EQ settings. It sounds like this. After those 3 snares, we have the hi-hats coming in. Super simple and super soft in the mix. And then there's also an open hi-hat that plays on a 6th beat of each 8-beat segment. I did EQ out the highs a little bit as well, and then I also slapped on an enveloper to bring out the transients in the release a little bit. And this is what it sounds like. Finally, in terms of the drums, we have this very soft crash at the start of each bar. I actually used Logic's stock SoCal drum kit and used a crash right, as you can see here, and this is what it sounds like. And apart from the drums, the only addition to the first 24 bars is the bass, and I chose the thumb bass for this one, and I slapped on some chorus effect, also some EQ out all of the highs, very strong EQ here because it's a very muffled bass, and this is what it sounds like. All together. And then as we move on to the verse, you can hear that electric piano comes in. I chose the Deluxe Classic electric piano and the Logic stock instruments. I did tweak this a little bit. I also did EQ out a lot of the highs and a bit of the lows, and then I also added some chroma verb. And then we see this brass lead come in. It's very ambient, and this is honestly probably one of the hardest sounds that I tried to look for. So I used a preset on ES2 called Saturn Lead, and then I brought out the mix a bit, the reverb a lot. I also EQ'd the hell out of the sound. I slapped on some chorus, and I layered two sounds. One that's one octave lower. This is what it sounds like. One thing I forgot to mention is I did automate this sound quite a lot. So first of all, the volume goes up and then comes back down, and I also added a high frequency automation where I bring out the highs a bit more and then take it all out towards the end. And then on bar 45, this really weird pluck synth comes in, but the first thing I want to go through is the guitar that accompanies it. So I chose the acoustic guitar, and this is what a pattern looks like. And then in terms of the really weird pluck synth, I actually used two different synths to make that. So the first one is this one called Asian Pluck Synth on Sculpture. In terms of the control, I did bring down the timbre a bit, brought up the tension, and then I also slapped on some EQ, layer 2 octaves as well. So this is what it sounds like. And then the second synth that I layered on top of that at a slightly lower volume is this one called Swede Picked Synth. So it comes with a lot of different effects already, but what I did do is add an exciter to make it a little bit brighter. I also did add some chorus to it and also some EQing a lot of the highs and the lows. By itself, it sounds like this. Finally, there's also another guitar that plays some of the lower notes. So for this one, I chose Roots Rock, and I also did EQ a bit of the highs out and the lows. Everything is very muffled in this track. So by itself, and all together in the mix. After the bass comes back in again, this really weird oscillating lead comes in, and I chose the preset on Retro Synth called 70s Analog Lead. This is probably one of the most widely used leads out of all of Tyler's albums. He probably tweaks the settings quite a bit for different tracks, but for this one I turned down the cutoff quite a bit. In terms of the effects, I also added some tremolo to it. Tremolo is what gives it that oscillating effect, and then I also added a phaser. And the electric piano here does change a little bit, so this is what it sounds like. Okay, and then after a quick break, we are back to the second chorus. What is added to the mix is some electric piano chords. I actually used two sounds. The first one is this one called Electric Harmonics. It's actually an ES2 synth, but it's basically, you know, an electric piano sound. And this is what it sounds like on its own. So it's still missing that little bit of ambient and almost like a pad sound. This is why I added a classic pad preset from ES2 as well with the same pattern. And then this really airy, like vocal sounding synth comes in, but to me it sounded almost a bit of a mix of a brassy sound as well as a really heavily synthesized female voice. So I did use two different sounds again, and the first one is a tuba instrument. I basically added some standard vibrato to it. Then I also EQ'd out all of the lows to make it a bit brighter, as well as some chroma verb. This is what it sounds like on its own. second component that I added is this synth called String Box at a very low volume because I just wanted it to layer on top of the tuba sound. This is an Alchemy preset, and I actually chose a bright pad setting. I also did tweak the controls a little bit and on its own. Alright, and then there's this DJ drama break. This is where a bell comes in. It's a really, really cool bell, and I'm pretty sure this is the exact preset that Tyler used. It's a Harlequin preset. The only thing is it was tweaked a little bit, so as you can see here, the release is turned up, delay is turned down, and then I also added some chorus to it, and then slapped on this super sick pattern. So cool. Then in the second half of the break, the tuba airy vocal synth comes back in again, and just a quick note is I actually automated this a little bit towards the end just because you'll hear that it goes almost out of tune. So all together in the entire mix. And then when the second verse comes in, there's this whole switch up where you hear a very cool marimba sound coming in. Just to show you guys, this is what I mean. The marimba is an interesting one. So it's a very, very fast pattern where there are two notes oscillating between each other, but the lower one I actually put a very low velocity because in the mix it's very, very soft. You can barely hear it. Slap on some chorus as well as some EQ so it's less whiny and annoying, and also added some stereo spread. So this is what it sounds like. As you can see, it's a 1/16 triplet, just to let you guys know. And on top of that, there's also another synth that's in the mid-range where I also really struggled to find. This is the closest I could get to it. It's a preset from Alchemy called Luminous Times, and I did tweak the synth quite a lot. In terms of the control, I did turn down the attack quite a lot, and then the cutoff is turned up, decay is turned down, so it's a bit shorter. And also I slapped on a bit of distortion, barely changed any of the default settings, and also EQ'd the hell out of it. And on top of that, to make it sound less chopped up like like that, I did add on a continuous sound, so you can see the pattern here. It's the same synth, same settings, just that it sounds like this. So together, the luminous synth. Aside from that, you can also hear a very ambient pad mixed with some strings in the background. So how I created this was, first of all, use soft analog pad with very little changes to how it sounds, and then penciled in these chords. And on top of that, I layered another synth called Analog Spheres. I just EQ'd out a lot of the highs and the lows. To top it all off, there's also some strings that come in, and I chose this Smart Strings from Logic Instrument. Same pattern, and this is what it sounds like. And then now we move on to the next part where it goes like this. So over here, the pads changed. I actually used a classic pad again. I also layered a classic brass pad on top of that. It's an ES2 preset. In terms of the controls, I did turn up the release a lot, and then I also added some chorus to it as well as delay. Together with the classic pad, it sounds like this. Then as we move on to the next section, there is the addition of this very ambient lead again. I used the same preset called the 70s analog lead. And to layer on top of that, there's also a string sound with the same pattern. And I chose the full strings instrument all together within the mix. now we move to the piano segment. Oh, this took me so long to nail, honestly. I don't even know if the pianos are super accurate, but I do think that I have the most accurate version out there. At least I hope so. So I chose the Steinway grand piano because it sounded most similar. I'm pretty sure it was recorded live, as with a lot of instruments that Tyler uses. But anyways, it sounds pretty similar already, I think. And I EQ'd out a lot of the highs and the lows, but the pattern is the most important here. I think that's what you guys want to see. I played it live for myself with, you know, some mistakes here and there, and then of course I corrected it one by one on MIDI. Before I continue on to the second half of the piano, some cellos come in. So over here, this is what it sounds like. And it continues, la-di-da-di-da, and now I will show you the rest of the piano. And then when it all ends, with DJ drama coming back in again, it sounds like this. And there you have it, guys. This is how I remade Massa. Do let me know down below in the comments on how you thought I did. Any criticisms, any feedback is more than welcome. I'm still learning. And of course, do let me know if you guys have any requests on what I should remake next. So yeah, thanks for watching. Do like, comment, and subscribe below. And if you want to see more of my own beats or even get access to a Logic file for this remake, just follow me and give me a DM and I'll send through a link. Thanks again for watching and see you next time.